Good day, everyone, and welcome to our third session in Introduction to the Philosophy of the Human Person. For today's lesson, we will be talking about the methods of philosophizing. But before that, let me present with you our objectives. First, to distinguish opinion from truth. Second, to analyze situations that show the difference. Third, to realize that the methods of philosophy lead to wisdom and truth. And last, to evaluate opinions. Last meeting, we talked about the important concepts in doing philosophy, which necessarily involves the act of asking questions, contemplating about the mystery of life, and constructing arguments and be able to rationally evaluate them in the end. Based on that concepts of doing philosophy, we could say that philosophizing means to ask questions, to reflect, and to formulate and evaluate arguments. Besides, it is to think or express oneself in a philosophical manner, and it considers or discusses a matter from a philosophical standpoint. Understanding the methods of philosophizing will not be possible without understanding knowledge, wisdom, and opinion. To begin with, let's take a look on Plato's metaphysical system, or also known as his theory of the idea of forms. So please listen to the audiovisual presentation that will follow.
Asking oneself and others what the perfect version of something is, the ideal version, might sound like a strange idea. What is the perfect marriage, or career, or system of government, or school? It can feel immature and naive to bother much with such questions. They're just daydreams. After all, who cares about ideal versions? We might as well deal with what we've got. But the great ancient Greek philosopher Plato strenuously disagrees with this. Throughout his work, he argues that focusing on the ideal version of something is one of the most useful kinds of thought exercises we can generate. It's by knowing what we think something should be like that we can more clearly start to define what might be wrong and focus on what we need to do to make the world slightly better. When he was talking about ideals, Plato used a slightly strange but ultimately rather useful word: the forms. So he asked not what is the ideal friendship or the ideal kind of parental love, he asked what is the form of friendship or the form of parental love. It does sound strange, but what he had in mind was something very practical. When a Greek stonemason was carving an ornament, they wouldn't just make it up themselves. They'd make use of a wooden template, or form, to check if they were getting it right. The form itself was made by the master, but if the mason possessed the form, they could more reliably do perfect work. This is Plato's basic picture of what an ideal is. It's the guide you need that shows you how to do something well yourself. If you've got possession of the form, you can be guided towards a true goal. A form, as Plato sees it, is a blueprint, a set of instructions for making a very good version of something. That's why we all need a well-thought-through set of forms to guide us in life. And unsurprisingly, it is philosophy that can guide us to these forms. So, for example, the form of friendship is a mental model of what a really good friendship actually involves. And if you grasp this model, if this idea is active in your mind, you will know how to be a good friend. Similarly, having a form of education in mind is going to be very useful for the teacher. It'll stop her being buffeted by events and day-to-day pressures. She'll be able to keep in mind where, ideally, she should be going. We've typically thought of ideals as fantasy projections that blithely ignore most of what life is actually like. We think of them as the opposite of being realistic. But Plato sees an ideal as the result of a deep understanding and careful engagement with reality. Someone setting up an airport would need, in the Platonic scheme, to have in mind the ideal air traffic control system, something optimally effective, efficient, and safe. This is the person who would, in Plato's terms, have grasped the form of air traffic control. We all need to have as many forms in mind as we possibly can. Plato is breaking the habitual assumption that searching for the ideal is at odds with getting things done in the rough and tumble of the real world, and he's pushing us to be more exacting about where we are trying to head to. If an ideal seems utterly distant and hopeless, maybe the problem isn't that it's too idealistic, but, in a strange but important way, actually not idealistic enough. That is, we've not quite yet discovered the form. We shouldn't abandon our ideals. We should get more ambitious about them, and Plato's philosophy is on hand to help us.
To sum up, let us again take a look on Plato's metaphysical system, wherein he defined philosophy as wisdom, and that knowledge is wisdom, and virtue is knowledge. In this metaphysical system, Plato believed that this world is not the basis for the attainment of true and real knowledge. Para sa kanya, ang mundong ito kailanman ay hindi maaaring pag-ugatan ng pagkakatuklas natin sa tunay na kaalaman o karunungan. That is why he assumed the existence of another world, not here on earth, but in another dimension. He did not term it as heaven, but rather, he believed that the objects of real knowledge must be ageless and eternal. From there, he claimed that everything in this world is considered as appearances. In other words, everything that exists is just a manifestation and form of what is real and true. He added that things that we perceive through our senses are always changing and therefore couldn't be the basis of true knowledge. The question now is, how can we have true knowledge if, as it were, these objects that we see in this world are always changing? Papaano daw natin makakamtan ang tunay na kaalaman kung ang lahat ng bagay na nakikita natin sa mundo ay nagbabago, including our perceptions of the physical world, where we see tables and chairs and other objects are always changing. So, for Plato, if something is to be accepted as knowledge, there must be an ultimate basis for it. That is absolute and unchanging. Para sa kanya, ang isang bagay ay magiging katanggap-tanggap bilang kaalaman kung ito ay may basehan o may pinagbatayan. At ang batayang ito ay marapat lang na buo, absolute. Siyang tugatog, supreme, at di nagbabago kailanman, or what we called it as unchanging. Thus, this world could not be the source of real and ultimate knowledge. Why? Because for something to be accepted as knowledge, that object of knowledge must be ageless and eternal. Therefore, he assumed the existence of another world where the real objects of knowledge could be found. And he called this the world of forms and ideas. The world that we are familiar with is changing world, where everything is changing. In this case, the objects that we see in this world could not serve as the ultimate basis of knowledge. For instance, how does one recognize that something is a chair when there are different kinds of chairs in this world? Somehow, Plato believed that our mind has this idea of the chair that enables us to recognize that something is a chair when we see one. This idea of the chairness of the chair, presumably, is based on our knowledge of this form and idea of the chair found in the other dimension, the world of forms and ideas. Thus, everything that we see in this world is merely a secondary copy of the idea that exists in the other world, which is the ultimate basis for knowledge. Moreover, Plato assumed that before we were born, our souls were once part of the world soul. And this world soul has immediate and direct contact with the world of forms and ideas. Consequently, it is the world soul which has a perfect and direct knowledge of the forms and ideas because it is the only entity that has full contact with the world of forms and ideas. Moreover, in the world of forms and ideas, there is what we call hierarchical structure. Thus, in the hierarchy, the easiest ideas to be recognized by the soul would be ideas about material objects, followed by mathematical ideas, and then abstract ideas. The highest and most difficult idea to be recognized according to Plato is no other than the idea of the good. The recognition of the idea of the good is actually the goal of Plato's philosophy for the attainment of the good life. He further states, especially in his allegory of the cave, that the soul of every man possesses the power of learning the truth and the organ to see it with, and just as one would have turned the whole body around in order the eye should see light instead of darkness. So, the entire soul must be turned away from changing world until its eye can bear to contemplate reality and that supreme splendor called the good. Here, he assumes that we have the innate ability to recognize and remember the perfect knowledge that we had before our soul joined the body, when it was still part of the world soul. Plato believed that before we were born, we had perfect knowledge as part of the world soul. But the moment that we were born, and when our soul joins the body has the effect of corrupting the soul. Thus, it makes the soul forget the knowledge that it had before joining the body. For this reason, Plato claims that knowledge is remembrance. It was a matter of remembering the knowledge that you had before in order to be able to pursue goodness and the good life. Here, Plato forwarded the idea of the dualism between mind and body. And later on, other philosophers like Saint Augustine and scholastic philosophy would incorporate this into the Christian doctrine where the body is evil and the spirit is good. For Plato, the pursuit of knowledge is connected with wisdom. The constant attempt of man to remember the good and thus regain knowledge is tantamount to having wisdom, because to know the good is immediately to pursue it. No one does wrong knowingly, For those who fail to do what is good, perhaps their souls have failed to remember the knowledge that they knew before. Thus, according to Plato, virtue is knowledge, and knowledge is wisdom. In Plato's metaphysics, the concept of knowledge is ordinary usage has taken on a new perspective. Under Platonic philosophy, knowledge is equivalent to virtue and wisdom. Thus, Plato's ethics and morality are embedded in his metaphysical system as the quest for the good life, and knowledge is a matter of knowing and remembering goodness, and once somebody knew, he would automatically become virtuous because he would immediately do what is good. And this constitutes the attainment of wisdom according to Plato. So, before we end up this topic lesson regarding Plato's metaphysical system, let us first have a rough up of this topic. Sa makatuwid, ang teoryang ito ay isang teorya kung saan ninanais maipahayag ni Plato ang kanyang mga paliwanag at paniniwala, lalo't higit sa dalawang magkaibang dimensyon na kung saan binibigyang diin niya ang likas na kabutihan ng isang tao bago pa man ito mapadpad sa mundong ginagalawan natin sa kasalukuyan. Ang likas na kabutihang ito ang pinaniniwalaan niyang siyang nakakaalam at para sa kanya ay nakatatanda or nakakaalaala ng kaalamang nakaugat sa tinatawag niyang kabilang dimensyon o sa wikang Ingles ay world of soul or world soul rather. Samantalang ang pag-aalaala at kaalamang ito para sa kanya ay ang siyang nag-uudyok o di kaya'y nagtutulak sa tao na palaging piliin at gawin ang gumawa ng kabutihan o mabuti. At sa kabilang banda, ay siya rin namang daan tungo sa magandang buhay. Bagamat hindi ito madaling gawin, nananatiling ito ang layunin at tunguhin ng filosofiya na pinaninindigan ni Plato. Sapagkat para sa kanya, sa huling bahagi ng pagpapaliwanag niya ng teoryang ito, ay kanyang binanggit na ang kaalaman ay nagsisimula sa pagtuklas at pag-alaala ng kabutihan o kung ano ang tinatawag nating kabutihan. Ibig sabihin, kung alam ng tao kung ano ang mabuti, ay mapagsusumikapan niya itong gawin. At para kay Plato, ito ang kaganapan at tugatog ng karunungan. Or in other words, this is actually the attainment of what we called wisdom. Let us now continue with understanding Plato's allegory of the cave.
What is reality? Knowledge, the meaning of life. Big topics you might tackle figuratively, explaining existence as a journey down a road or across an ocean, a climb, a war, a book, a thread, a game, a window of opportunity, or an all too short-lived flicker of flame. 2,400 years ago, one of history's most famous thinkers said life is like being chained up in a cave, forced to watch shadows flitting across a stone wall. Pretty cheery, right? That's actually what Plato suggested in his allegory of the cave, found in Book 7 of the Republic, in which the Greek philosopher envisioned the ideal society by examining concepts like justice, truth, and beauty. In the allegory, a group of prisoners have been confined in a cavern since birth with no knowledge of the outside world. They are chained facing a wall, unable to turn their heads, while a fire behind them gives off a faint light. Occasionally, people pass by the fire carrying figures of animals and other objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners name and classify these illusions, believing they're perceiving actual entities. Suddenly, one prisoner is freed and brought outside for the first time. The sunlight hurts his eyes, and he finds the new environment disorienting. When told that the things around him are real, while the shadows were mere reflections, he cannot believe it. The shadows appeared much clearer to him, but gradually his eyes adjust until he can look at reflections in the water, at objects directly, and finally at the sun, whose light is the ultimate source of everything he has seen. The prisoner returns to the cave to share his discovery, but he is no longer used to the darkness and has a hard time seeing the shadows on the wall. The other prisoners think the journey has made him stupid and blind, and violently resist any attempts to free them. Plato introduces this passage as an analogy of what it's like to be a philosopher trying to educate the public. Most people are not just comfortable in their ignorance, but hostile to anyone who points it out. In fact, the real-life Socrates was sentenced to death by the Athenian government for disrupting the social order, and his student Plato spends much of the Republic disparaging Athenian democracy, while promoting rule by philosopher kings. With the cave parable, Plato may be arguing that the masses are too stubborn and ignorant to govern themselves. But the allegory has captured imaginations for 2,400 years because it can be read in far more ways. Importantly, the allegory is connected to the theory of forms developed in Plato's other dialogues, which holds that, like the shadows on the wall, things in the physical world are flawed reflections of ideal forms, such as roundness or beauty. In this way, the cave leads to many fundamental questions, including the origin of knowledge, the problem of representation, and the nature of reality itself. For theologians, the ideal forms exist in the mind of a creator. For philosophers of language viewing the forms as linguistic concepts, the theory illustrates the problem of grouping concrete things under abstract terms. And others still wonder whether we can really know that the things outside the cave are any more real than the shadows. As we go about our lives, can we be confident in what we think we know? Perhaps one day a glimmer of light may punch a hole in your most basic assumptions. Will you break free to struggle towards the light, even if it costs you your friends and family? Or stick with comfortable and familiar illusions? Truth or habit? Light or shadow? Hard choices, but if it's any consolation, you're not alone. There are lots of us down here.
Plato's allegory of the cave is actually an attempt to explain the nature of reality or the nature of existence itself. And even how do people acquire knowledge? Paano ba nag-iisip? Paano ba natutuklasan? Or paano natuklasan ng tao ang tinatawag nating kaalaman? In the allegory, the cave is actually a representation of the state or the condition, definitely of most of the people or the human persons in our society nowadays. It is also a symbolic suggestion towards the modern world that is full of ignorance. And of course, the people who were enchained do symbolize the ignorant people. In other words, they were the people who exist in this ignorant world. On the other hand, the story of an exit from the cave, which is very dramatic, is actually the source of true or authentic understanding. Why? Simply because the moment that the man went out from the cave, he was able to see, he was able to learn, and he was able to understand the reality behind the walls in the cave. On the other hand, cave reveals also the epistemology of Plato. Cave in this allegory means the world of opinion, while the outside means the world of knowledge. Plato says that the natural place for men is no other than ignorance, kawalan ng alam, kawalan ng pakialam. This is actually racked by the senses and prejudices. And most of the human persons live under the yoke or under the influence or under the world of what we call opinion. Therefore, we do work on itself, bring about a revolution in the way of seeing the world, and convert our eyes to get rid of this world of opinion. Aside from that, in one way or another, Plato's allegory of the cave could be also interpreted in this way. Going back to the meaning or definition of allegory, we could say that an allegory is a story consists of deeper meaning, or in other words, ang mga tauhan, tagpuan, at kilos ay nagpapahayag ng higit pa sa literal nitong kahulugan o nagnanais maipabatid ang damdaming abstract. Let's take it one by one. The cave in the allegory could be a symbol of our mind, which is actually known as tabula rasa or an absence of preconceived ideas. Walang alam, hukag sa kaalaman, hanggang sa unti-unti o sa paglipas ng panahon ay nagkakaroon ng kamalayan o kaalaman. The prisoners, yung mga bilanggo, people who were in change, are actually representations or manifestations of the humanity, of all of us, who started to believe that what our eyes can see and perceive is real or true. But it is important to take note that Plato emphasized that not everything we can see is actually real, but rather this can be considered as form of ideas. Next, people who were bringing something. They refer to the people who are in authority, like politicians. They are the people who can manipulate us and make us believe with the things that are not real, especially with their or to their promises. On the other hand, things brought by the people symbolize an object, an event, or even a situation that we claim to be true. So ito yung dala ng mga tao na siyang sumisimbolo sa mga bagay, pangyayari, o sitwasyon na agad o pilit nating pinaniniwalaan at akala natin ay totoo pero hindi naman pala. Fire is a false belief. Mga maling paniniwala o mapanlinlang na katotohanan na tulad ng apoy ay kayang lumikha ng isang tagpo o kaganapan na tila kapani-paniwala. So going back to the story, 'di ba? Bakit nagkaroon ng mga anino? Why those shadows were formed? That is actually because of the fire. Kung kaya nga nagkaroon ng ideya ang mga taong bilanggo kung ano ang katotohanan na nagaganap sa labas. At ang katotohanan ito ay pinanghawakan nila hanggang sa huli na hindi nila nakikita or natatagpuan kung ano ba talaga ang nagaganap at ano ang tunay na kaganapan sa likod ng mga nakakubling balakid sa anyo ng wall na kanilang kinasasadlakan. Then, we have also shadow. Ito yung mga inaakalang katotohanan. Going back to the allegory of the cave, the prisoners, like what I have said, they were able to form their ideas of such objects because of the shapes and forms portrayed through the shadows. Then, yung nakalayang tao or yung taong nakalabas mula sa kuweba. He or she is considered as the enlightened one, or in other words, the educated human person, na matapos matuklasan ang bagay-bagay sa paligid, ay namulat sa kung ano ang katotohanan. Why? Because he or she was able to see the outside world. Then, sun and reflection are actually known as truths that lead us to see, learn, and understand reality of existence and the acquisition of knowledge. Plato's allegory of the cave describes the process of the enlightenment of the soul, where the prisoner started with the shadows inside the cave to the realization that the sun, representing the idea of the good, is the source of whatever is true and good for all things. To complete our understanding about Plato's metaphysical system, let us continue with understanding the divided line by Plato. Plato's divided line represents one's ascent from the world of opinion inside the cave with its beliefs and illusions to the world of real knowledge, where the real objects of knowledge could be found and known as the forms and ideas. In other words, Plato's divided line is actually connected and related to his allegory of the cave, wherein he believed in the two dimensions of the world, known as the sensible world or world of experience, and the other dimension known as the intelligible world or world of true knowledge. The sensible world is known through the use of our senses, paving the basis for opinion, our belief, and illusion, while the intelligible world is known through the use of the intellect, paving the basis for knowledge, or known as noesis, or reason using intellect, and dianoia, or understanding using scientific, mathematical, or abstract hypothesis. Belief or illusion is considered as the lower type in Plato's allegory. This is represented by the shadows seen by the prisoners. This would also include second-hand information that we accept without further investigation or search for any evidence. Noesis is claimed to be higher than dianoia because it deals with grasping of complete or perfect knowledge of the forms and ideas, especially the idea of the good, the knowledge that is attained through contemplation. The attainment of this knowledge means that one would simultaneously proceed to apply this knowledge to the particular instances in his life. Thus, becoming virtuous is attaining wisdom, according to Plato. And to better understand this Plato's divided line, please watch a short video clip.
To talk to you about Plato's analogy of the divided line. It's supposedly a simile, but it really just looks like a line. So the first step in Plato's divided line is to, well, draw a line and then divide it into two unequal parts, so a ratio of 2 to 1. Then divide those parts into the same ratio so your line looks something like this. This left part, which A and B are in, is the world of the forms, or in other words, the intelligible realm. The other side, where C and D are, is the world of appearances, or the visible realm. Plato believed that the closer you got to the intelligible realm, the closer you would get to the truth and reality, and therefore the visible realm is where you are least likely to get to the truth and be further away from reality. So let's start naming things. First of all, what's in section D? Well, Plato called this the epistemic state of illusion, or ikasia, because why not throw a fancy word in to impress people? In this state, images exist, such as shadows and reflections. But why is this the furthest away from the truth? Well, imagine you are standing by a tree and you can see its shadow. Obviously you can see its vague shape and branches, but depending on where the light source is, it's going to change shape, so you don't actually know the real shape of the tree, and therefore you just can't gain much knowledge from it. Section C, the bigger section of the visible realm, is where the epistemic state of belief, or pistis, is. This is the state where objects exist, such as animals and man-made items. This is where Plato said we could use our senses, so for example, right now you can hear my voice. But remember, Plato didn't think you could get knowledge from using our senses, so that is why he classifies it as belief. So what does C and D combined give us? Opinion, or doxa. Okay, so our visible realm is getting a little crowded, so let's move on into the intelligible realm. In section B, we have mathematical reasoning, dianola, where some ideas are, mainly mathematical forms, so maths, and geometry. Remember, Plato thinks that maths is one of the closest things to knowledge we can get in our world, and this is because when we think of concepts such as the perfect straight line or perfect equilateral triangle, we are accessing things that are impossible for us to experience in the physical world. And therefore, section B is above section C in our quest for truth and in the intelligible realm. Finally, section A is where intelligence is, or noesis. It sounds like a disease, whatever. This is where pure ideas are, so the forms and philosophy, naturally, are placed here. Although Plato is quite vague on how we access the forms, the basic idea is that we can access them in the same way we can access the idea of a perfect straight line, using our minds. So in our diagram, A and B combine to give us knowledge, or episteme. And there you have it, Plato's simile of the divided line.
To support the idea of Plato, let us now take the philosophy of Socrates. The unexamined life is not worth living. What does it mean? This passage is meant to emphasize the importance of contemplation, or the philosophical life, in order to remember the perfect knowledge that the soul knew before it joined the body. This is done without having to rely on the senses, which could clutter our understanding with appearances or opinion, but solely through the use of our intellect. Thus, this is direct knowledge of the forms and ideas through the forms and ideas themselves, without having to rely on the senses in order to reach, attain, and remember knowledge of the highest idea of them all. The idea of goodness, which is the key towards the attainment of wisdom. So in other words, babalik at babalik pa rin tayo sa paniniwala ni Plato that the world consists of two different dimensions, wherein ang tao ay mayroong likas na kabutihan. And that attainment or pursuing of the idea of good is actually the attainment of what we call wisdom, which is actually supported by the philosophy of Socrates. Let us now proceed to the difference between opinion and fact. So to go deeper, kindly spend a little time for watching this short video clip.
Welcome to today's lesson. First, watch this quick video of Jane.
It's cleaning time. A clean bathroom. Oh no.
Hey Mom. Wow. What a pretty spider. That was scary. Now answer these questions. Do you agree or disagree with each statement, or is the statement true or not? First, Jane was cleaning the bathroom. Next, cleaning the bathroom is easy. How about, Jane is scared of spiders? And what about, the boy is scared of spiders? Finally, spiders are scary. What is different about these statements? Well, the ones on the left are facts. You can check the information in the video. And those on the right are opinions. Not everybody will have the same answer. A fact. A fact is a true statement. It is something that we can check. An opinion. An opinion is just the way one person thinks. People may disagree with an opinion. Are the following statements opinions or facts? French fries taste better with tomato ketchup. This is an opinion. Spiders have 8 legs. This is a fact. Disneyland is better than Disney Sea. This is an opinion. So why is this important to know? When you give an opinion, always try to support it with facts. For example, I think Disneyland is better than Disney Sea. I love fast rides, and there are more fast rides in Disneyland than Disney Sea, like Space Mountain and Big Thunder Mountain. Thank you for watching.
Alright, understanding the difference between opinion and fact is actually not a new lesson for all of you. Because when you were in elementary or when you were in junior high school, you have taken up already a lesson regarding the difference between opinion and fact. So, let us start. Opinions are prepositions based on personal belief, view, or judgment that cannot be verified with evidence. In other words, opinions are often personal interpretations. So, like what you have seen in the previous video clip, there were some opinions that are coming from the personal interpretations of the human person. Aside from that, opinions are also called as value judgment. Why? Simply because it is based on the values of the human person who will make a judgment. Aside from that, opinions could be considered as subjective, meaning to say, it arises from our own feelings or emotions. Moreover, opinions consist of words that expresses beliefs, feelings, and speculations. Some of the examples of opinions are there. The sun is shining. I think that it will be very hot in Texas this coming August. The sun is made of green cheese. Your hair is very beautiful. So in one way or another, these examples of opinions or statements are really coming from one's belief, one's speculation, or one's feeling and emotion. To continue, opinions are subjective because they are mind dependent, meaning all beliefs are subjective because they are dependent to a person's belief system. So let's take another example. I think that it is good to go to Boracay now while it is summer. And another one, I do not think that it is good to go to Boracay because even if it is still summer, we are now experiencing some rainy days. So since opinions are subjective to person, it cannot be proven to be true or false, as what is true for one person is not always true to another. So, katulad ng ating halimbawa, there are two different ways of giving opinions. The other one is he or she or the speaker agrees that it is good to go to Boracay, while on the other hand, the speaker does not agree. Then, opinion or opinions are also normative. Why? Because they give evaluations and suggestions for particular situations. So, like for instance, killing is wrong because if it is not immoral, then everybody would do it without of any fear or repercussions. Everyone would do it in order to survive and protect or expand their possessions. So, with this statement, we may see that it gives an evaluation, and on the later part, it suggests a different statement, especially in particular situation. Moreover, opinions are based on personal beliefs, feelings, and speculations simply because they are plausible, and emotions can cloud one's reasoning that can lead to false judgment. So these are based on speculation, meaning to say they are plausible. From one time or from time to time, pwedeng magkamali. Kasi nga po ito ay nakadepende, we are making our statement, we are making our judgment not based on truth, not based on reality, but rather based on a feeling, on an emotion or speculation that may be subjected for changes or subjected for change. On the other hand, fact, or known as truth, is a proposition or statement that can be verified through empirical evidences. They are difficult to be logically disputed or rejected. Moreover, facts are objective. Some facts are verifiable through empirical evidences, but others can be proven through the use of our reasoning. Some of the examples: the Earth is oblate spheroid, Rodrigo Duterte is the 16th President of the Philippines, and Mary is the daughter of Anna. So honestly speaking, upon looking at these examples, we may say that these statements are really proven, and they were actually supported by facts and different statements. Then, fact as objective. Facts are objective because their value is not dependent on one's personal beliefs or biases. Meaning to say, the truthfulness and value of the statement is not dependent on one's subjective understanding of the details or the statement itself. It is also considered as descriptive. Why? Because they try to describe or represent or explain an aspect of the world. So, like for example, the statement given, it describes how microphones and speakers work. So, meaning to say, nagsasalaysay ng isang katotohanan. So, that is why fact is considered as descriptive. Truth. Facts are considered true when they are validated using logical reasoning. Mathematical propositions, ethical arguments, and abstract reasoning can be verified as true even if they are not perceivable in the physical world. Not all factual statements are true. For example, the statement, "there are different parts of the tongue dedicated to different tastes," is not true. However, this was known fact before. Tool in distinguishing truth and opinion. We have critical thinking, logical thinking, or logical reasoning. Critical thinking is the method of suspending beliefs and judgment in order to distinguish facts and opinion. So like we have said in our previous lesson, particularly in holistic perspective, holistic perspective actually inculcates and entails this kind of critical thinking, that we tend to suspend our judgments, our beliefs, in order for us to distinguish facts from opinion. The other one is logic or reason, which is composed of principles that govern the validity of arguments and assumptions. Moreover, critical thinking is a careful, intentional thinking that use reason and logic in assessing judgment and beliefs. So, these are the examples given. But take note, critical thinking is not congruent or not is equivalent to criticizing. So magkaiba po yon. Critical thinking involves logical reasoning. It includes our critical mindset or our philosophical mindset in order for us to make our judgments and beliefs possible at the end of the statement. While on the other hand, pag sinabi natin criticizing, you are just critiquing or you are just looking at something that needs to be improved in a particular scenario or in a particular condition or situation. The other one is logical reasoning, which uncovers possible biases, prejudices of an argument, and also distinguishes inconsistency and incoherence in one's argument or opinion. It includes the validity or strength of the argument, which also include the deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. On the other hand, it also considers the soundness of what we call statement or argument. So let's go deeper in understanding the difference between logic and critical thinking as tools in reasoning. Logic is actually the centered in the analysis and construction of arguments, while logic and critical thinking serve as paths to freedom from half-truths and deceptions. There are two types of reasoning, known as deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. You are very familiar with these two types of reasoning because these types of reasoning were actually implemented or were being applied in your research subject. So whenever we will be talking about deductive, meaning to say, it draws conclusion from usually one broad judgment or definition and one more specific assertion, often an inference. So meaning to say, kaya siya sinabing deductive, you are drawing up or you are having your conclusion from a broad or general topic going to a very specific or particular topic. On the other hand, it is usually described as a top-down chain of argument. So let's take a look on the given example. All men are mortal. That is the general and the broad topic. Going to the second premise, Aristotle is a man. And therefore, when you were arriving into a conclusion, you could say that Aristotle is a mortal. That is actually a specific conclusion. So from general, going to specific, so that you may be able to formulate a specific conclusion. Then, a deductive reasoning should be also valid. But how do we consider the validity of an argument? How could we find out if our reasoning, our argument is a valid argument. Validity is the logical connection between the premises and the conclusion of a deductive argument. So let's take a look on this example and let us consider whether this example is valid or invalid. All mothers over 90 are moody. That is the general premise. My mother is over 90. That is the specific premise. Therefore, my mother is moody. That is actually a specific conclusion. And looking upon the validity of the argument, we could say that it is valid. Why? Because going back to the definition of what do we mean by validity, it should be or it should refer to what we call connection between the premises and the conclusion of a deductive argument. Ibig sabihin, kinakailangan yung kanyang konklusyon ay hahanguin mo mula sa pagkakaugnay ng general premise at nung tinatawag nating specific premise. And definitely, nakita natin in the specific conclusion that there is what we call connection. And therefore, that statement could be considered as valid. Ang tanong ngayon, how do we consider if our argument is a sound argument? It will talks about differently. Okay? It talks differently. Bakit po? Because whenever we will be talking about the soundness of an argument, it has something to do with the sense, with the meaning of the argument itself. So, ibig sabihin, kailangan may kabuluhan, kailangan may kahulugan. Okay? And that refers to the soundness of the argument. Next, the second one is the inductive reasoning, which is actually based from observations in order to make generalizations. It often applied in prediction, forecasting, or behavior. In other words, inductive reasoning makes broad generalization out of specific instances or observations. It is usually described as a bottom-top chain of argument. How do we say so? Let's take a look on the example given. Sarah and Harold are UP students. This statement is actually a specific premise. Sarah is intelligent. Harold is intelligent. Therefore, all UP students are smart. Going back to premise 1, premise 2, and premise 3, these are actually the specific observations, the specific instances, or the specific arguments and premises that we gave on. And from that premises, specific premises, we were able now to make a broader generalization or a broader conclusion. And that is what we call inductive reasoning. Now, unlike deductive reasoning, it is difficult to check the validity of inductive reasoning simply because the premises that are used in proving its conclusion are based on particular observations which may or may not have direct relationship to the conclusion. Since inductive reasoning count the number of instances or observations that supports a specific conclusion, it can only tell whether an argument is strong or weak. So let's take an example to have a better understanding of what am I telling. Example A. All odd numbers are integers. All even numbers are integers. Therefore, all odd numbers are even numbers. This is actually not necessarily true. So, meaning to say, this argument shows weak reasoning. It started by providing specific assumptions that are true but ended up with an illogical conclusion. On the other hand, letter B, after 6 months of careful observation by scientists and wildlife conservationists, they were not able to find any sign of West African black rhinoceros. Therefore, they concluded that the West African black rhino is extinct. This argument shows strong reasoning. Why? Because it relied on a statistical or predictive argument that involved a 6 month of careful observations. Thus, even if it is not explicitly stated, it is implied that the conclusion has been based from numerous particular observations. Let's take a look on this summary. Going back, opinions are propositions based on personal belief, view, or judgment that cannot be verified with evidence. While on the other hand, facts are considered true when they are validated using logical reasoning. Besides, opinions state value judgment, while on the other hand, some facts are verifiable through empirical evidences. Opinions are subjective, while facts are objective. And opinions express beliefs, feelings, and speculations of the human person himself, while some facts can be proven true using reasoning. And to have a better understanding of what is meant by opinion or true, let us now find it out through watching this video clip. Actually towards the end and towards the core of our topic lesson, methods of philosophizing. Methods of philosophizing includes the Socratic or the dialectic method. It consists of embracing and taking on the hypothesis or view of opponent as if you agree with it, after which you will try to deduce contradictory consequences of the same hypothesis to make it look absurd. To explain it further, let me use a video presentation. To begin with, the Socratic method is a didactic dialogue of questioning that is expressed in the critical examination and cross-examination of the positions of every participant in the dialogue. However, it is important to note that this method is simply a way to discover the truth. Hence, the Socratic method is neither a rhetoric or the art of persuasion, nor a debate in which participants in a dialogue or discourse or discussion prove their position. For this reason, those who are involved in a dialogue do not attempt to persuade the other or debate with each other, but work together in order to discover the truth. Thus, the didactic dialogue of Socrates intends not to convey new truth, but only as a guide in arriving the truth. Socrates calls this method meiotic or intellectual midwifery. When intellectual midwifery is at work in a dialogue, the participants do not force fit their own beliefs on others. Instead, as already mentioned, they work together in order to arrive at the truth. Applied in a classroom setting, the teacher does not seek to inculcate the students with knowledge or truths. On the contrary, the teacher simply acts as a guide in arriving at certain truths. Thus, in this method, the students are no longer viewed as passive recipients of knowledge, but as an active agent in the acquisition of knowledge. Here, the students think for themselves, and the Socratic teacher only facilitates the discussion. It is worth noting, however, that the participants in the dialogue must first admit their ignorance. This is because, for Socrates, knowledge begins the moment one admits her ignorance. That is, one realizes that she does not know. Thus the famous Socratic dictum, know thyself. For sure, it is when we admit that we do not know, that there is so much to know, that the more we know, the more that we do not know, that we begin to seek the truth and acquire wisdom. More importantly, the Socratic method is a way of thinking that involves three important steps in arriving at the truth. In the first step, we give an initial definition of a thing or a concept. For example, we say a table is a four-legged furniture. In the second step, we look for those characteristics of the table that are not captured in the initial definition. For example, we may ask the question, is the table a cow? We raise this question because of our initial definition of the concept of a table is based solely on the idea of the four legs. Then it follows that anything that has four legs can be called a table. But is a cow really a table simply because it has four legs? Obviously not. This question would lead us to the third step, where we give additional or new definition of a table. Thus, we may say, a table is a four-legged furniture made up of wood and has a flat surface. Let me schematically show the three steps in Socratic method. Step 1. A table is a four-legged furniture. Step 2. Is the table a cow? Step 3. A table is a four-legged furniture made up of wood and has a flat surface. Now, if we repeat these steps, then we eventually arrive at the truth. That is, we eventually came up with a precise definition of a table, understood as the essence of a table. Indeed, that which makes a table, or that which makes a table completely different from any other things, such as a cow or a chair. Thus, we may say a table is a four-legged furniture made up of wood, has a flat surface, rectangular in shape, and is used primarily for dining or putting things on it. As we can see, this is the essence of a table. This is what makes a table, so that even if one sits on a table, the table remains a table. It does not become a chair because the main purpose of the table is for dining or for putting things on it, and not for sitting. Let us consider another example. Step 1. Freedom is the ability of the human person to do whatever she wants to do. Step 2. Am I really free to kill my enemy simply because I hate him? Step 3. No. We cannot just kill anybody we want to kill. There are rules to follow in a civilized society. Now, if we repeat this process, then eventually we can come up with a true definition of freedom. Indeed, with the Socratic method, we are able to improve our understanding of something and eventually arrive at the truth. For sure, with the Socratic method, an individual is able to move from the state of not knowing to that of knowing. Lastly, this process is what we call the Socratic dialectic. On the other hand, we have the method of systematic doubt, which consists in doubting everything that can be doubted until you arrive at clear and distinct ideas which are nonsensical to doubt. Once these are established as indubitable, this would qualify as the starting points of knowledge. Thus, René Descartes went on to prove the existence of the self as one of the three indubitable premises of knowledge in the dictum, I think, therefore I am. So again, thank you very much for participating, for listening in our third session in Introduction to the Philosophy of the Human Person with the topic entitled The Methods of Philosophizing. Thank you very much.